everyone. Welcome to another segment of intellectual brainstorming and academic excellence. My name is David Oni, and my YouTube channel is David Oni Wiz. I want to use this medium to thank our numerous subscribers that have subscribed to our channels. I also want to use this medium to encourage those that have not subscribed to subscribe to this channel. And apart from that, you can leave your comment and your notification so that whenever we will upload any video on YouTube, you'll be one of the first people to have the privilege of watching those videos. Today, we're going to look at another different topic, like we always do every time. This time around, we're going to look at what we called the Cold War. The Cold War. That's our topic, the Cold War. You will realize that after the Second World War, or when the Second World War started in 1939, it actually ended in the year 1945 with the Allied victory over the axis of power. That is, the United States, the Soviet Union, France, and Britain, and all their allies. They were able to win the war, and Germany, Japan, and some other countries were actually defeated. So the Second World War came to an end in 1945. With the end of the Second World War in 1945, there was an arms race. There was a Cold War starting from 1947 to the year 1991 with the disintegration of the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, that is USSR, in 1991. That was in December 25, 1991. With the fall and the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Iron Curtain, which is the Berlin Wall, and the United States of America became the only superpowers in the world. But let us quickly go back memory lane and try to digress into this topic that is called the Cold War. After the Second World War, America in 1945, America and the Soviet Union, that is USSR, became the most powerful country in the world. And because these two countries became the most powerful country in the world, there was a rivalry between them. And this rivalry was the period that was called the Cold War. When we are talking about the Cold War, we're not talking about an open confrontation between these two countries. What they did was that they engaged in propaganda, they engaged in espionage, they engaged in proxy war, and they also engaged in all forms of what? Space race as well, in order to have dominion over the other one, to have control or spheres of influence over the other one. So during the Cold War, the United States was became the Western Bloc and Russia became the Eastern Bloc. By becoming the Western Bloc, America, what it means is that America is the capitalist state. That is, America was a capitalist state, and Soviet Union became what? The communist state. So there was a struggle between communism and capitalism. And if you could remember in our topics, we discussed what we call capitalism, and we also discussed what we call communism. When you're talking about capitalism, you're talking about a free market economy where the means of production, distribution, and exchange are controlled by or by private individuals with government participation at a minimum. And when you're talking about communism, you're talking about a political, economic, and social system where the means of production, distribution, and exchange is controlled by the state. So there was a Cold War between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. The Western Bloc was represented by the United States, and the Eastern Bloc was represented by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. So that was the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. Now, because of the rivalry between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, it led to the creation of what we call the Nato Organization. And what is NATO? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was actually established in the year 1949. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That is what we mean by NATO. North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949. And to counter the move by the by the United States, Russia or USSR came out with its own version of what of NATO, which was called the Warsaw Party. The Warsaw Party, which was established in 1955 to counter the influence of what of the United States of America, which was represented by the Western Bloc. So we have NATO, you know, on one side, which is the Western Bloc, and we have what the Warsaw part, which is what the Eastern Bloc. So the struggle was much between these two, great powers, between these great superpowers, because during the period of what of this struggle, they were able to develop nuclear weapons. They were able to develop nuclear weapons. You should remember that one of the reasons why America was able to defeat the Japanese during the Second World War was that they were able to develop a nuclear power. So America became the first country in the world that was able to develop a nuclear weapon, and this nuclear weapon was actually dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And because these weapons were what was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it led to the destruction of so many lives in Japan. As a result of that, Japan had to surrender during the Second World War. So the Second World War actually came to an end in 1945 because of that. So America defeated Japan during this period because of the development of, what, of the nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, subsequently, you know, Russia too was able to develop its own nuclear weapon. So because of that, there was what we call MAD. MAD. And what is MAD? Mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured destruction. That is the term. MAD. Mutually assured destruction. So what we mean by mutually assured destruction is that each of these countries, they have what it takes to fight themselves. So there is a deterrence. Deterrence is that you have the weapon and I have the same weapon. So we can easily, destroy ourselves. So because of that, they know that they cannot use this weapon against themselves because it will lead to what we call mutually assured destruction between them. So they could not use this war, but what they did was that they actually engaged what we call proxy war, where they were able to, promote their interest, their ideological interest in all these countries spanning from Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world. They were able to have this influence. So they were able to carry out proxy war in those six countries where they supported each group or bloc against each other. So that is it. So MAD, like I said, is mutually assured destruction. And because there was this mutually assured destruction, they were not able to use or have an open confrontation between themselves. But what they did was that they used Africa, Asia, and some other parts of the world as a battlefield between themselves. Now, because of this fact that they have mutually assured destruction, it led to what we call strategic arms limitation. By strategic arms limitation, we're saying that here that because they know that they both have what it has to do to lead to their destruction, they have to limit the amount of weapons that they were producing, you know, between themselves. So we're talking about what we call nuclear proliferation treaty here. Nuclear non-proliferation nuclear treaty. That is, they have to limit the stockpile of their nuclear weapons so that they cannot be able to destroy each other. So there is actually, so this thing continued from the period of 1947, like I said, to the period of 1991, when actually, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic was actually disintegrated at that period in time. Now, let us quickly, you know, there was also a time that there was a kind of a Sino-Soviet split. That is, there was a problem between China and Russia. China and Russia, and because of that, America was able to capitalize on that by visiting one of the presidents of America to visit China to show support for China, so that they can be able to reduce the influence of Russia as a result of doing this Cold War period. So now let us quickly look at there's what we also call detent. We're still going to look at what we call detent. And what do we mean by detent? Detent is the period in which the the so-called superpowers had to limit, they had to go into what we call talks They have to go into negotiation. They have to go into talks between themselves in order to diffuse or to reduce the level of what of pressure between them militarily. You understand? Like I said, also they had to compete for data space and some other things like that. So it was really a period. There was actually a tension in the world at that time because of the Cold War. And like I told you, the Cold War was an era with which these countries actually developed dangerous weapons. They actually developed dangerous weapons. They actually developed nuclear weapons. They actually supported wars in various parts of the world, though they were not directly involved. But they gave most of these countries their military supplies and some other things to fight themselves during this particular period. And we're going to quickly look at all these things, the areas in which the United States and Russia were able to have a tension between themselves during the era of the Cold War. So one of them is the Chinese Civil War that started in 1927 and ended in the year 1950. During this Chinese Civil War, there was war in China at that time. It was a civil war, and this civil war actually lasted a very long time. And the so-called superpower powers actually played a very great role in this civil war in China at that time from 1927 to 1920 to 1950. They also have the Cuban Missile Crisis that started in 1962. When you talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, we are talking about the period in which the United States was able to, the Russians were able to take, to store nuclear weapon at the backyard of the United States in 1962. And that time, it almost escalated into what we call the Third World War because the Americans were able to give the Russians an ultimatum to remove that weapon from Cuba. And you know the consequence of that. The Russians actually removed the weapons from Russia, from America, from the backyard of America. And that led to the diffuse of that, military confrontation between the United States and the the Russians, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. Then we also have the Korean Civil War, the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. The Korean War was a war that was fought between South Korea and North Korea. And North Korea was actually supported by Russia, and South Korea was actually supported by the United States. And you know the role that was played by America at that time. A lot of Americans died at that time, with America and the Americans and their allies lost about 200 and something thousand soldiers, while the Chinese that were involved in the war with the North Koreans lost almost more than 1 million soldiers at that time because of the Korean Civil War from 1950 to 1953. Though the Russians were not militarily involved, but they gave substantial or substantive effort or supply or support to the Chinese to wage this war with the North Koreans against what? Against Americans in the Korean War in 1950 to 1953. Then we also have the Vietnam War from 1967 to 1970. That war was a war that was fought between the North and the South in Vietnam. The war came to an end also. Then the most important one, which I believe is very, very important here, is what we call the Berlin Wall. If you remember, after the fall of the Germans in 1945, with the surrender of the Germans in 1945, the Second World War came to an end, and Germany was divided into two parts. That is, Western Germany and Eastern Germany. Western Germany was administered by the Americans and their allies, while the so-called Eastern Germany was administered by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, which is Russia. And because of that, there was economic boom or economic prosperity in Western Germany, while the economy of the Eastern Germany was stagnated. And because of that, a lot of people were struggling to cross from Eastern Germany to what we call the Western Germany, and a lot of lives were actually lost. During that time, there was an iron curtain. There was an iron curtain. The iron curtain was that Germany was divided into two, West and what and the East Germany. But with the dissolution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic and the breaking of the Berlin Wall, or the Berlin Wall coming to fall, or the breaking down of the Berlin Wall, Germany was actually unified you know, there was nothing like East Germany again or West Germany. It now became what the Republic of Germany. They were actually unified after the what? After the fall of the Berlin Wall. Then another thing we should take notice that is that we were talking about. We should also talk about is the fall of the Soviet Union. Because of the Cold War between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, between these two great superpowers, there was actually it actually affected the economy of Russia, because the economy of it got to a point that the economy of Russia became stagnated and the economy was not moving forward. And because of that, subsequent leaders that came up in Russia at that time, one of them was what the man they called Gorbachev. Gorbachev came to power in the mid 80s. Gorbachev was one of was the Russian leader at that time that came to power. And when Gorbachev came to power, he introduced two policies. One of them is a perestroika, and the other one was what we call a glasnost. Glasnost is what is openness, and perestroika is what is restructuring of the economy to compete with the Western world. That is what we call the glasnost and the perestroika. So when he came up with this perestroika and glasnost, there was a coup in Russia at that time, and unfortunately, in the year 1991, exactly December 25, 1991, the Russian Federation was actually, you know, it led to the fall of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. And with the fall of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the constituent, republics, or those countries that were the satellite states at that time under Russia, became independent, and it led to the fall of Russia. And with the fall of Russia, it made America to become what? The only superpower in the world. Then we also talk about the issue of what we call the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. The Russians actually invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and that war lasted for about 10 years. That war lasted about 10 years. The war came to an end, in 1989. And unfortunately, Russia they left, Afghanistan with shame at that time, because the Afghanistan were actually equipped by the Americans against the Russians because of this Cold War. And Russia, they lost a lot of things because of that war, and they left, uh, Afghanistan with shame. They were actually defeated. So all these factors and more, contributed to what we call the Cold War. So the Cold War was not a period of open confrontation between the superpowers, but it was a period in which each of them, mutually, made effort to have their ideology superseding the other one. So the Cold War was an ideological war between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. It's a very, very interesting topic, and a lot of things actually what happened during this time. And unfortunately, the Cold War led to the fall of the Russian Federation. I mean, to the fall of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, and the emergence of America as the most strongest country in the world, or the most superpower, or the only monopower that we have in the world. And don't forget, we also have what we call the bipolar, multipolar system, tripartite, and the rest of them. But because of that end of the Cold War, America became what the only superpower. But that is not to say that Russia does not have nuclear weapon. That is not to say that Russia is not relevant. Today, Russia is still relevant, because most of these countries, Russia, and the Americans, most of these countries, they have nuclear weapons, and they have what it takes to destroy each other, you know. But because of the fact that these countries, they have this problem, they have what we call detent. They had to go into detent. But unfortunately, the issue of detent came to an end with the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Detent was the period in which these countries, they decided, to have an open, talk with each other. They visited each other's country, and they discussed with themselves on how to mutually, influence each other in terms of their ideological differences. But unfortunately, the era of detent of peace did not last long, because when Russia was invaded Afghanistan in 1979, the issue of what of the Cold War started again. So today now, the Cold War is still relevant and is still ripe because most of these countries too, we still have capitalism. What as the basis or the focal economic system in the world today, while social communism has actually what collapsed. And apart from that, most countries are what are driving to what we call capitalism now. And of course, capitalism has come with its own negative consequences and what and its own advantages as well, such as imperialism and globalization. So globalization is the modern form of imperialism now. And when we are talking about imperialism and globalization, we are talking about a new world order or economic domination. Economic domination, which we're still going to discuss in our subsequent lectures. We're going to look at what we call imperialism, economic imperialism, political imperialism, cultural imperialism, social imperialism, and economic imperialism. There are so many of them. You understand? So when you talk about imperialism, you can look at it at the various perspectives. You can talk about economic imperialism, political imperialism, social imperialism, and all forms of imperialism, which is what is characterized by the world today. So then we talk about globalization as well, the effect of globalization. How has globalization what affected the world one way or the other? On this note, I am going to end my topic on the Cold War. Um, of course, there has been an interesting topic. We'll try as much as possible to, to look at the time and to ensure that we're able to cover as much track as we can in this topic. You agree with me that this has been a very interesting topic. We have looked at what we call, Cold War today, how it started in 1947 and how it ended in what in 1991. That was exactly December 25, 1991. We have looked at the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Afghanistan war, so many wars that characterize this era of what of the Cold War, the American spheres of influence and the Russian spheres of influence, the constituent republics that were under Russia, the leader that were at that time, Gorbachev, that came up with Glasnost and Perestroika, economic policies, and we looked at President Richard Nixon, that was also American president at that time, and the role that all these people played during the era of the Cold War. So on this note, we're going to end the topic on the Cold War. I remember your humble servant. My name once again is David Oni, and my YouTube channel is what is David Oni with. I want to use this medium to encourage you to subscribe to this channel on the YouTube. Subscribe to this channel, leave your notification, and leave your comment as well. And don't forget that please don't forget to tell your friends about this channel so that we can all benefit academically from this inspirational and highly informative and educative platform that we're going to create on YouTube. Till we meet next time, thank you and God bless you.